Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and discovering that your body suddenly feels twice as heavy. You try to get out of bed, but your legs struggle to push you upright. You walk toward the kitchen, and every step feels like you're carrying a backpack filled with bricks. Outside, cars are moving slower, airplanes are grounded, buildings are under stress. And millions of people are wondering the same terrifying question. What just happened to Earth? Now imagine scientists confirming something almost impossible. Gravity has suddenly become 50% stronger. Welcome to Future and Facts Hub. Today, we're going to explore what would really happen if Earth's gravity suddenly increased by 50%. Would humans survive? What would happen to airplanes, cars, skyscrapers, oceans, animals, and even the atmosphere? And most importantly, could civilization continue living on a planet where everything suddenly weighs half again as much? Let's start with the first few seconds. If Earth's gravitational pull suddenly increased by 50%, everything around us would immediately experience the change. Your mass wouldn't actually increase, but your weight would. A person who weighs 180 pounds on Earth would suddenly feel as if they weighed about 270 pounds. A 60-pound object would feel like it weighed 90 pounds. Even something as simple as lifting a glass of water would become noticeably harder. For most healthy people, standing wouldn't immediately become impossible, but movement would become exhausting. Your muscles would have to work much harder just to perform normal activities. Walking upstairs could feel like climbing while carrying another person. Running would become extremely difficult. Jumping would almost disappear as a practical ability, because the stronger gravitational pull would drag you back toward the ground much faster. And this wouldn't only affect humans. Animals would feel it too. Birds would struggle to stay in the air. Small animals might adapt better because their bodies are lighter. But larger animals would face serious problems. Horses, elephants, giraffes, and other large creatures already have to support enormous body weights. Adding another 50% could place extreme stress on their bones, joints, hearts, and muscles. But humans would have an even bigger problem. Our bodies evolved under Earth's current gravity. Our bones and muscles are designed for the forces we experience every day. Suddenly increasing gravity by 50% would place enormous stress on the cardiovascular system. Your heart would have to work harder to pump blood, especially upward toward the brain. Blood would tend to pool more strongly in the lower parts of the body. For some people, simply standing could become dangerous. And remember, this is happening everywhere at the same time. In cities, the situation would become even more dramatic. Buildings are designed to support their own weight along with people, furniture, equipment, wind forces, and other loads. A 50% increase in gravitational force wouldn't automatically make every skyscraper collapse, but it would dramatically increase the load carried by structures. Older buildings and structures with little safety margin could become vulnerable. Bridges would experience enormous additional forces. Suspension bridges would face increased tension. Roads would experience greater stress from vehicles. Elevators would become heavier to operate. Construction cranes would suddenly be dealing with loads far beyond their normal operating conditions. And then there's transportation. Cars would technically still work, but acceleration would become more difficult, because tires would need to push against a much heavier vehicle. Braking could become more complicated because the forces acting on the vehicle would change. Engines would need to work harder to move the same mass against gravity, especially when climbing hills. But airplanes would face an even bigger problem. Aircraft are designed around a very precise relationship between weight, lift, thrust, and drag. Increase gravity by 50% and every airplane suddenly becomes much heavier in terms of weight. The wings would need to generate significantly more lift, just to keep the aircraft in the air. At the same speed and under the same conditions, many aircraft would simply be unable to maintain normal flight. Airlines would ground huge portions of their fleets almost immediately. Imagine airports across America suddenly filling with stranded passengers. While engineers desperately calculate whether any aircraft can safely take off, rocket launches would become an even bigger nightmare. Space rockets already require enormous amounts of energy to escape Earth's gravity. If gravity suddenly became 50% stronger, reaching orbit would become substantially harder. Rockets would need more performance, more fuel, or completely different designs. Space missions could be delayed for years. But the most fascinating effects wouldn't necessarily happen on land. They would happen in the oceans and atmosphere. Gravity doesn't just pull people toward the ground. It controls the behavior of Earth's atmosphere and oceans. Stronger gravity would compress the atmosphere more strongly toward the surface. The distribution of atmospheric pressure would change. And the atmosphere would become more concentrated near the ground. That means the air pressure we experience at sea level would change. For humans and animals, breathing could feel different because the atmospheric structure itself would be changing. Weather systems could also behave differently because gravity is one of the forces influencing atmospheric circulation. The oceans would respond too. Water would be pulled more strongly toward Earth's surface. Ocean levels wouldn't simply rise by 50%, but the balance of atmospheric pressure, tides, waves, and fluid movement would change. Coastal regions could experience unusual changes in water behavior. And then there is one object everyone would be watching. The Moon. The Moon is held in orbit around Earth because of gravity. If Earth's gravitational attraction suddenly became stronger while the Moon's position and velocity initially remained the same, its orbit would no longer be perfectly balanced. The Moon could move into a different orbit. Earth's tides would also change. Because tidal forces depend strongly on the gravitational interaction between Earth and the Moon. That could create serious consequences for coastal ecosystems and marine life. But here's where things get really strange. If gravity became 50% stronger everywhere on Earth, the Earth's own structure could eventually respond. Earth isn't a perfectly rigid ball. The planet is constantly moving, deforming, and adjusting under gravitational forces. A sudden change in gravity would alter the balance of forces inside the planet. The atmosphere, oceans, crust, and interior would all respond differently. Earthquakes could potentially become more likely in some regions as stresses changed. Although the exact effects would depend on the physical mechanism behind the gravity increase. And that's an important point. For this thought experiment, we're assuming gravity somehow becomes 50% stronger instantly without Earth's mass suddenly increasing. In real physics, making gravity stronger would require changing something fundamental about the gravitational field or Earth's mass-energy distribution. But if we ignore the impossible part and simply ask what the consequences would be, the answer becomes terrifying. Human civilization would be forced to adapt. Sports would change completely. Basketball players would struggle to jump. High jumping records would become almost meaningless. Professional football players would have to carry much greater loads with every movement. Running speeds would fall dramatically. Even simple exercises like climbing stairs would become serious workouts. And over generations, something fascinating could happen. Humans might begin to evolve. If higher gravity lasted for thousands or millions of years, natural selection could favor shorter, stronger bodies. Humans might develop thicker bones, stronger muscles, and cardiovascular systems better adapted to moving blood under increased gravitational pressure. Tall bodies could become less advantageous. A future human living under stronger gravity might look very different from us. But we wouldn't have thousands of years to adapt. The first days and weeks would be the real crisis. Hospitals would fill with people suffering from physical stress. Emergency services would become overwhelmed. Aircraft would be grounded. Supply chains would slow down. Heavy trucks would consume more energy. Construction projects would stop. Ports would face difficulties moving cargo. Even something as simple as delivering food would become harder. Modern civilization depends on moving billions of kilograms of material every day. Increase gravitational force by 50% and the entire transportation network suddenly becomes less efficient. Electricity production could also be affected. Power plants depend on massive machines. Cooling systems, pumps, fuel transportation, and complex infrastructure. Some systems could continue operating, while others would need adjustments. Nuclear power plants would face particularly strict engineering concerns, because safety systems are designed around precise physical conditions. And then there's agriculture. Plants themselves don't have muscles, but gravity influences how they grow. Roots respond to gravity. Water moves through soil and plant tissues under gravitational forces. Stronger gravity could alter plant growth and water distribution. Large trees could have an especially difficult time. Their enormous structures already fight gravity every day as they transport water from their roots to leaves hundreds of feet above the ground. A 50% stronger gravitational environment could make it much harder for very tall plants to survive. Forests could change. Ecosystems could change. And eventually, the entire planet could begin to look different. But would humanity go extinct? Probably not immediately. Humans are incredibly adaptable. We would redesign transportation. We would create specialized mobility equipment. Buildings would be reinforced. Aircraft would be redesigned. Medical technology would focus on cardiovascular and musculoskeletal problems. Cities could become more compact. People might rely more heavily on machines and robotics to perform physically demanding work. Robots would suddenly become incredibly valuable. Imagine a world where lifting a heavy box is no longer a simple task. A warehouse worker might need robotic assistance just to move equipment that was previously manageable. Construction workers could use powered exoskeletons. Hospitals could use robotic systems to move patients. Military technology would change. Sports would change. Architecture would change. Even the way we design furniture would change. But there's another frightening possibility. What if the gravity increase wasn't temporary? What if it stayed at 50% stronger forever? Humanity would eventually face a completely different Earth. Aircraft might become rare and extremely specialized. Space travel would become much more expensive. Tall skyscrapers could become less practical. Large animals could become less common. Human bodies could gradually become shorter and stronger over generations. And our dreams of becoming a multiplanetary civilization would become much harder. Launching rockets from Earth would require significantly more energy. Every kilogram sent into space would become more expensive. Mars colonization projects could face a strange advantage, though. Mars already has much lower gravity than Earth. If Earth's gravity became 50% stronger while Mars remained unchanged, the difference between the two worlds would become even greater. A person traveling from high-gravity Earth to Mars would experience an enormous change in physical loading. Mars might suddenly feel incredibly light. And that could create an unexpected advantage for future space explorers. But there is one final question. Could Earth itself survive? Yes. Earth wouldn't simply explode or collapse because gravity became 50% stronger. The planet is already held together by its own gravity. A hypothetical increase in surface gravity wouldn't automatically destroy the planet. But civilization as we know it could be transformed. The biggest lesson from this thought experiment is that gravity is something we usually take completely for granted. Every step you take depends on it. Every building depends on it. Every airplane flight is a battle against it. Every ocean wave, every falling object, every orbiting satellite, and even the way your heart pumps blood is influenced by gravity. We don't notice gravity because it has always been there. But change it by just 50%. And suddenly the invisible force shaping our entire world becomes impossible to ignore. Tomorrow morning, you could wake up and discover that your own body has become its own greatest burden. The sky could become harder to reach. The roads could become harder to travel. The tallest buildings could become dangerous. And the simple act of walking outside could feel like surviving on another planet. So if gravity suddenly became 50% stronger, humanity probably wouldn't disappear overnight. But the world we know would. And perhaps the scariest part is this. We would finally understand just how perfectly balanced our planet has always been. This is Future and Facts Hub, where we explore the questions that make you look at our world in a completely different way. And if you're enjoying this kind of mind-bending science and future scenarios, make sure you subscribe to Future and Facts Hub. We explore the questions that sound impossible today but could completely change the way you see tomorrow.